Unfortunately, these massive natural disasters and catastrophes are not the only threat. People will take advantage of others both before and after a disaster scenario.
The Claytons say they have a new problem: looters.
We had some people walking around the house and in the house, and one of the neighbors had to come down and run them off. Actually threatened violence to get them to leave.
Wait, they were inside your house?
Yeah, they were inside the house.
Thomasville police are now looking for one person they say broke into a store and stole weapons in the middle of Helene's landfall. There's surveillance video that was shared by TPD that shows what police say is a burglar going into a local business, breaking into cases and going behind counters and grabbing multiple guns. Police say it all went down while other people were hunkering down in the middle of the storm.
8 migrants have been arrested after police say they were taking advantage of a Tennessee community that was ravaged by Hurricane Helene by going in and looting whatever they could find. All 8 of the men were arrested and given a $20,000 bond. They are being charged with burglary and aggravated burglary.
Which is why I wanted to make a video about the 4 stages of looter threats that you need to be prepared for, because they come in waves. They have different tactics and different means of taking advantage of people in these catastrophic events. You have to be very careful about how you act both before and after a disaster. It is dangerous. These people are violent and you should be ready for them, okay? So what I did is I reached out to a friend of mine who's in law enforcement as well as in emergency management and asked them about some of these threats. And this is the information they provided me with. You know who you are. I appreciate you helping me out and helping this community. And this is good information for anybody who might find themselves in a disaster area. And of course, we never know where that could be because there's lots of people right now in the country who never expected to be affected by a hurricane the way that they're currently being affected right now. So please take note of this regardless of your location. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I gotta mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. And thanks to them, I can provide you information like this that's relevant to preparedness. And of course, they have all the equipment and gear you might need to protect yourself from looters. And looters are a huge problem. And this is something that we need to address. And as a community, we have to make sure these people don't have power over us during an emergency. So what are the 4 stages of looter threats? First off, this is where some real concern comes into play. And this is what you should be paying attention to even before something happens. So if you're in hurricane country and you have an advanced warning of a storm, this is something you should definitely pay attention to because you're not the only one who has advanced warning. So we'll call this emergent threats. Now, this is from day 0 to day 3. And we're going to categorize everything based on what day of the disaster period we're in to give you an idea of how the threat level changes based on that environment, okay? Now, emergent threats can actually occur both during the disaster, literally in the middle of it, and before it during a warning period or even the evacuation time. Because evacuation is actually one of the best things for a looter. They understand that people are leaving their homes or their property behind in order to escape a dangerous situation, which means their job of robbing innocent Americans is suddenly much easier to do. So, in this emergent period, most of your threats are going to come from opportunistic actors who are committing theft by force, and it's a likely threat because of their perceived lack of security and ease of success when it comes to your home or your business or anything else that you might have in that area. Obviously, people are leaving, people are focused on the storm, and even though it hasn't even made landfall yet, or even though whatever other natural disaster we're discussing this could apply to might be, if they have advanced warning of any kind, this gives them an opportunity. Or if there's evacuations of any kind, especially when we're talking about like wildfires, for example. This happens all the time in California where people are evacuated and then looters come in post-evacuation. So these are usually, like I said, opportunistic actors, but they come well armed and in large numbers because they do anticipate possibly having some sort of interaction. And they know that what they're doing is illegal and obviously something that people are going to resist. So they don't show up empty-handed. They come in box trucks with multiple people. We've seen evidence in places like Tennessee just as recently as Hurricane Helene where people are being arrested for doing just these types of things. So please keep that in mind. And of course, in places like Florida, they're already preemptively trying to cut off any looters before they get started.
We will charge you to the fullest extent of the law. And jail is a good place for that person. But that's a lucky place, because if you walk into someone's house in this county, there's a good chance you're not walking out. And I want to be clear about that. You don't get to victimize our great residents. So the unfortunate people that think they're going to commit crime here, my message is clear. Not in Lee County. Don't come here. We will get you. We will hunt you down. And again, jail will be an easy place for you here, and you'll be charged to the fullest extent of the law.
There's a lot of things happening right now that the government tries to do, but it still falls on you directly to take care of your own safety and security during these situations, as proven here very recently. So, the best response during this emergent period, like I said, day 0 to day 3, during the storm or during the disaster, before it, if there is any level of warning, and immediately thereafter, your awareness needs to be heightened, your physical security and your immediate access of means to defend yourself needs to be right there ready for you. You have to be in a state of readiness, and you have to be able to respond to any type of threat that might occur, which is why you need certain levels of equipment. Things like this, definitely first aid. Why? Because you don't know what's going to happen or where these people are going to be or what their tactics might be in order to accomplish their goal, and you have to be ready for the worst. So, this is where things are during that period. And this is a difficult thing to accomplish because you're maybe literally in the middle of a natural disaster and you're sitting here wondering if you have access to a firearm or access to first aid or body armor or something like that, just in case these people, who are terrible people, show up out of the blue, right? So usually our focus is on what's going on with the storm. But you have to understand there's a human element that's also part of that threat. Now, moving on is going to be called the reestablishment stage. Okay, so we're on stage 2 now. We already did stage 1, which was the emergent period. Now we're on stage 2, which is the reestablishment period or reestablishment stage. And this is going to be from day 3 to day 10. Now, this would be the most dangerous time when it comes to encountering looters and people who are intent on taking advantage of you. Okay, so keep this in mind. This is a very dangerous time, and a lot of people are living in this time period right this second as this video is being posted. So, this is the time between emergency life-saving actions and before utilities come back on and before rule of law is restored. We know that post a disaster, there's no infrastructure. No one's got power, no one's got water, there's no internet. As we've seen from Hurricane Helene, communications are gone. People aren't able to call for help or let other people know what's happening, including their neighbors. So, this is obviously a beneficial scenario for those who want to commit crimes like looting. But the other thing to keep in mind is that rule of law is also gone in many ways because you can't reach out to those emergency first responders. There are no police in many ways. So, ideal time for these people to do terrible things. And you have to understand that it's not just stealing your property that they concern themselves with sometimes. So, what are you expecting during this time, the reestablishment zone, day 3 to day 10? Overt groups of looters. Okay, so you'll see people who are coming in and just doing it in broad daylight, not trying to hide their identity or anything like that, because they're very confident about their success rate. People are gone or they're in dire straits, and these people are, at least to some degree, organized and have manpower. So they're not worried about resistance as much as they might have been before, because they're coming to specific places that have been hit by the disaster the hardest. You're also going to get covert or disguised looters starting to come in. And that's where people are going to be wearing utility company uniforms, or they're going to be wearing construction worker uniforms, or they're going to have some level of authenticity to them from a overt appearance, when in reality they're there to loot. So they'll use this to their advantage, to either gain access to areas or buildings that they wouldn't otherwise have access to, or they'll use it to gain trust from the people in the community to not ask questions about what it is they're doing. When the guys in the construction uniforms are going into homes and pulling out materials, people are going to assume they're part of the recovery effort. But in reality, they might just be stealing anything valuable from inside. So this is what's going to be happening during that time. And this can apply to building materials even. If they want to start taking copper wire and all types of other expensive materials like lumber at this point in time, That's something that they might do, and while wearing construction worker outfits and having labeled vehicles and everything else, no one might ask a single question. So you have to be prepared and aware of these things. And the other thing that comes along with these people, your overt looters, your covert looters, is also your opportunity criminals. And when I say that, what I mean is that these are violent criminal opportunists who will come out because of the lack of rule of law and the fact that there is no infrastructure for people to use to call help or anything like that. Even being able to communicate with their immediate neighbors is highly difficult compared to what it was before. And these people are coming in and understanding that now is their chance to commit horrendous crimes. And this is going to be specific to things like armed robbery, as well as sexual assault and things of that nature. So this is a very dangerous time. They're not just there to steal your property. Some of these people are there to commit crimes that they think the environment gives them the best chance of getting away with. So that's why self-protection is so important during these scenarios and during this time post-disaster. You can't ignore the need for tools like this or for life-saving equipment like this during this time. You should have it with you. There's a reason why boots on the ground right now working these relief efforts across the country are armed. It's not because they're the police. It's because they know that their area is at a heightened risk of danger. And these people who are there trying to help others still need a way to protect themselves. So please take note of that right now. This is a very difficult period of time post-disaster. Now, how do you respond to this? Well, first off, you need heavy physical security. So that means you need numbers, manpower, if possible, right? Hopefully you have a decent sense of community, and you also need the ability to provide that security. So like I said, you got to have some level of weaponry, you got to have some level of self-defense, and some level of immediate first aid just in case things get to that level. This is where it becomes very important to know your neighborhood and know your community, because you're also going to want to patrol your neighborhood and your community to some degree because infrastructure is down. You can't rely on your wireless video surveillance system anymore. You can't rely on your neighbor calling you from down the block to see what's going on. You can't rely on that anymore. So you patrol with other members of the community, not alone if possible, right? In order to establish a deterrence for the people who want to come into your neighborhood and take advantage of you and others. And you want to intercept any crimes that are being committed. Because if you're out and about and you're well equipped and you have the skills to respond to an emergency or a crime taking place and something horrible is happening to your neighbor down the street, the ability to respond to that is going to be increasingly beneficial the longer this goes on for. So, right now, regardless of where you are or what you do, please go out and at least try to meet your neighbors, even if it's just your immediate next door neighbors. And at the very least, for those of you who are introverts or have agoraphobia or whatever it is, who just cannot bring yourself to meet your neighbors or network with anybody in your community, at the very least, start doing some reconnaissance and surveillance and take what might be referred to as a target deck, but these aren't targets. This is just an informational database that you're acquiring to find out who is in your neighborhood and who's generally doing what. So you have some idea of what is and is not normal post-disaster. How will you know if someone isn't supposed to be in your neighborhood if you have no idea who your neighbors are? But if you know, at least at the bare minimum, generally who's around you, it'll be easier for you to identify a threat when it shows up. So you have to have some of that information stored away to be aware of what to watch out for thereafter. If you don't know anyone in your neighborhood, then anyone can show up from anywhere and you might not know if they're supposed to be there. This is why this is so important. Not to mention the networking and community need and assistance thereafter post a disaster is extremely important as well. So please make those steps now. Moving on, stage 3, okay? This is the chaotic recovery stage. This is between day 10 and day 45. Now, all of these days and time ranges are obviously based on circumstance. They can change, they're fluid, right? But this is just a general base idea of what you should be expecting during these periods of time. So, the chaotic recovery stage. This is when utilities are restored, but local authorities are still spread very thin. They're very weakened because of the post-disaster environment. And rule of law and public messaging is back, but it's just in a weakened state. So PSAs are able to be put out, people are understanding what's going on the ground, and there is some presence of authority, right? So this point in time, things have become a little less dangerous, but there's still threats to be considered, and there's still things that you should be aware of as a survivor of a disaster, okay? So here's where the threat comes in during this time, and this threat is more about taking advantage of people rather than the violent aspect of it, but it's still very important to be aware of, okay? So during this time, this is when cleanup operations are going to be targeted by scammers. And so the scammer teams come in and try to insert themselves into the rebuilding and recovery effort. And what this does is provides them with an income opportunity for those who are suddenly desperate without any intention of ever delivering on the services that they're providing. So they're coming in and they're offering aid to people. And if you don't know who these people are, please be very wary of it. It doesn't even matter if they are an accredited organization. Do some research. And if you didn't actually specifically call them for help yourself, you need to say no at first until you know for a fact that what's happening is exactly what it's supposed to be. Because otherwise, you're probably going to be scammed. People will go around these wrecked neighborhoods, right? People whose houses were washed away in a flood or burned down in a fire or whatever it may be, and they'll start offering services. Hey, I see your house, you lost your roof. We're here to help rebuild your roof. All you got to do is pay us this much money. We can get started right away. You'll get ahead of the line. You won't have to wait for everybody else to get their stuff figured out. Insurance doesn't have to get involved right away. It's really easy for you, this or that, right? And some people might say okay because they're desperate and they just want their life to get back to normal as soon as possible. Unfortunately, they're going to have all of the credentials that look legitimate from the outside. They're going to take that initial down payment or whatever it is they're asking you for, and then they're going to leave and you'll never see them again because they're the next neighborhood over doing the exact same thing to the next guy who doesn't have a roof. So this is a time for you to be very cautious about who you put any trust in at all. Like I said, even if they have some level of credibility, if you can't research it or validate it, then you can't trust it. That's just real life, and that's just the way these things work. Now, this is still a somewhat dangerous environment, okay? Because there's still opportunists and criminal actors out there trying to see if there's anything left for the pickings. So you can't just let your guard down because, well, 911 is back up and running. We still know how long does that take in the sense of a response. How many other people are calling 911? Are 911 calls being diverted to fires and other first aid related emergencies rather than you being robbed at gunpoint? These are all considerations you have to make. So this is still a very dangerous time. You still need ways to defend yourself. You still need community and you still need people to band together to make sure that bad things aren't happening to each other. But the violent threat has lessened slightly during this time as in comparison to the reestablishment stage. So in this situation, to be prepared for it, you need to be understanding of how cleanup operations work prior to the disaster. If you don't know how these things operate in general, and the first time you're ever experiencing or witnessing or even taking notes on how these disaster cleanup operations work is post a disaster that you personally are experiencing, then you're not going to know when things are out of place. You won't be able to identify out of character activities that shouldn't be happening. And it makes things a lot more difficult for you to navigate when it comes to being scammed or not. So do yourself a favor now and put in the effort and the time to get a basic understanding of what disaster response and disaster relief would look like, even if you've never experienced it. Because that's how most people are. Most people have never experienced disaster relief until they're in a disaster. And at that point in time, it's too late for them to have any prior standards to base any of their opinions on when it comes to trying to sniff out a scam. So that would be my suggestion now in order to prepare yourself for that scenario if it ever happens in the future. And of course, one more time, the violence threat has not fully seceded yet. It's still heightened compared to normal daily life. It's just not as much of a threat as it was in the reestablishment stage. Okay, I just need to make sure to verify that and reiterate it because I do not want any of you to let your guard down during any of these stages. Okay, now let's move on to the fourth stage of looter threats because these people are awful and of course they should be reminded why they shouldn't try to do the things they're doing. And this is our job to remind them because there is no authority immediately post a disaster, which is why I'm making this video because As Americans, we have to be able to deal with these things ourselves, as we're witnessing right now around the country. Nobody's coming to help you. It's just us. So please keep that in mind. Telling on these people after the fact isn't going to do a thing. All right. Now, the fourth stage, okay? Stabilization. This is day 45 and beyond. So we're starting to see some stabilization. And like I said, a good friend of mine who's in law enforcement and emergency management gave me this information. I thought it was worth sharing from someone who's inside that actually works on these types of scenarios and wants people like you to be better prepared. I also want to mention that Nightline Inc. is a big supporter of the channel. And in case you're looking for any ways to be able to search for people or help others in the dark when there's no lights at all, make sure you check out Nightline Inc. because they can solve that problem for you. And of course, if you use the code MAGICPrepper, you'll get a discount. So I had to mention that because I have friends at Nightline Inc. Stabilization stage. Like I said, day 45 plus, okay? This is post-emergency full recovery of infrastructure systems, right? In some cases, like some of these people who are surviving the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, it will be much longer than 45 days for this period to begin. So please keep that in mind. Like I said, that these date ranges are fluid and they're not exact. It's just an estimation, right? Everything's back online. So if you need to go to the hospital, you can go to the hospital. If you need to call 911, you can call 911. If you need to go to the store and buy groceries, you can go to the store and buy groceries, right? So this is the stabilization stage, all right? This is where things change quite a bit from the initial looting of people trying to ransack your home and your property and possibly take things from you that aren't necessarily related to property and might be related to your body. But during this time, they have to change tactics because things are not exactly a disaster zone anymore. And their actions aren't as easily, let's just say, overlooked. So in this stage of stabilization, you have to be careful about your information. And what I'm saying here is the fact that your information and lots of information about people in general in your area has been publicly distributed and available because of the disaster response and the media attention. Your name, your address, your location could be all over the internet and all over the local media because they're trying to give people ideas about what's going on in the sense of where rescue efforts are needed or where the rebuilding process has begun or anything along those lines. So throughout the entire disaster, your entire neighborhood might have been broadcast on national television, right? There might be drone footage of you literally crawling out of the roof of your home asking for help. We've seen this plenty of times, right? And so information is available to bad people now. All types of information. Things that you might not consider to be important in the sense of, well, I don't care if someone sees the top of my house because of my roof blowing off, But now you have someone who can recognize how long it will take to rebuild and recover from the situation that you're personally in, and what the security situation is in your neighborhood or your community, and what type of valuables or what level of income your community has, and all types of information. Not to mention, every single broadcast has street names and addresses and the names of survivors and victims and everything else being put out there. So public information is running amok right now, okay? And theft of all kinds becomes problematic. So you have scams coming through. You have the fraudulent donation crimes, right? Where people are asking for donations and then taking that money and running away with it, right? We all know this happens regularly all over the place, right? And speaking of that, just so you're all aware, I really appreciate everybody helping me out with the fire relief here in my community. And we were able to raise quite a bit of money. $692 came in, which was all spent on supplies that were then taken and delivered to the drop-off point here in town, which I have a shorts video on the channel. You can go check that out with if you'd like. And then, of course, additional funds have still come in. Please don't feel the need to send any more funds. This community has really come together and really supported the families who are in need. And I think that we're moving pretty well forward in the right direction. And any additional funds that have come in since that $692 are going into the victims fund that was set up here at our local bank that those people can access directly in order to get the things that they need. So I do appreciate that, but I am also saying that you don't necessarily need to keep supporting it. I just really was surprised and impressed by how much support we actually got. So thank you so much, because I know how much everyone is helping the victims of Hurricane Helene right now. And I know it was a big ask, and people still came through and supported that. So I appreciate that. And I brought that up to make sure you're aware that the donations that were sent to me are being properly distributed. But that doesn't always happen. That's not always the case. And these people go around taking donations from good-hearted Americans that want to help other people, and then they steal them. So this is a big issue. And then we also have things like property theft still occurring, because if people can identify areas that are harder to reach and still have some level of value to what might be in the area, they're going to try and go take it. And the other thing that suddenly becomes very problematic is identity theft. And people are going to be out there trying their best to use that disaster to their advantage. They heard about the names of you and your family online or on a news broadcast or whatever it was, right? They heard about the names of people who passed away during the event, right? People who might be easier to steal in the sense of identity because they're no longer alive, right? We know that that's the types of people who are often targeted, because there's a gray area between them being alive and them no longer being alive, and how it all works with their identity and their credit and everything else. So there's a lot of that happening. So this is a big issue that happens after a disaster that a lot of people don't discuss very often. Your OPSEC after a disaster is literally gone. It's just gone. We all know where you live now. We all saw your entire neighborhood. We all saw exactly how your areas of egress and everything else would exist if somebody wanted to coordinate some level of large-scale theft, right? Like this is a big issue that doesn't get much attention. And then the other side of it is the cyber aspect of identity theft, and people realizing like, hey, I know where to get this information now. Or hey, I know how to get the additional details on somebody's life that can help me pass as being that person when I'm using their identity to commit fraud. This is something that you definitely need to be aware of. So how do you respond to that? How do you be prepared for stage 4? You have to maintain that heightened state of awareness all the way through this thing. You have to, because people are still going to be out there taking crimes of opportunity, just not as much as an excess as directly after or during the disaster, but it's still an issue. And then you also have to reestablish your information security wherever possible. So whether or not that's online, whether or not that's just locally, whether or not that's just trying to ensure that you're not broadcasting your level of distress to everybody else on the planet. There's a lot of ways to try to mitigate some of that, but having some level of identity theft protection or something like that would be a good idea for this situation, because at least that's one arena you don't have to concern yourself with as much when you're just trying to rebuild your life, right? And try rebuilding your life post disaster and trying to recover from everything, and suddenly your identity is ruined and you no longer have a credit score and a million other things are happening to you when all you're concerned about is rebuilding your home, right? Like this is a huge problem that really doesn't get enough coverage, because by the time we reach stage 4, day 45 and plus, right, the media has moved on and nobody's writing stories about how all these people lost their identities or lost their homes or anything else just because of bad actors, not even because of the storm or the fire or whatever disaster it was itself. So this is the 4 stages of looter threats you got to be prepared for. And I think that by breaking it down this way, it really helps to kind of give someone a guide as to what level of awareness and heightened readiness they need to be at based on what period of time they're currently in, right? And I think personally for myself, when it comes to planning for this type of stuff, I like having that level of structure to know that, okay, we just had a disaster. Right now, things are really dangerous. Right now, things are getting weird. But the first thing we have to do is survive the disaster, right? And then knowing that directly thereafter, things are even more dangerous from the human element than they are from the actual natural element. So having the structure gives you a better way to strategize with what it is you need to do during these time periods. And I hope that helps you. I hope that helps anyone else who is currently living in some of these stages right now, because there are people in Florida who are in basically emergent or reestablishment stages right this second. And then we also have people in North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, right? Those people, and still Florida also from Hurricane Helene, are in the chaotic recovery, and some parts maybe in the stabilization stage, but in reality, lots of Americans right this second are in these stages of looter threats, which is why I wanted to make this video to hopefully help any of those people who either may be able to actually watch a video like this, or anyone who can be prepared for this before experiencing a disaster will be better off post-disaster, at least I hope. So, like I said, big thanks to my friend in law enforcement and emergency management who provided me with this information. I really appreciate having that insight, something that I don't personally have experience with, which gives me better information to give to you. So I was very grateful for that. Obviously, we got to just keep trying to help people where we can. And this community here where I live, we just had wildfires, and I got a lot of support from you all. And I really appreciate that. Please don't feel the need to send any more support my way. There's still a lot to be done down in the Hurricane Helene disaster zone, but there's also a lot to be done now because of Hurricane Milton in Florida. In my hometown, Sarasota, Florida, was hit pretty hard. So there's a lot of work to be done there as well now. A lot of things going on in the world, right? We got to take care of ourselves. It's just you and me. It's just us Americans. Or, I mean, if you're watching from Europe or Canada or, anywhere else, it's just you. Definitely do not rely on your government. Trust me. People are finding that out the hard way right now. It's unfortunate that it took that for people to wake up to this concept, but there's a very, let's just say, focused awakening of the average person right now that our governments are not here for our best interests, and it is just us. So that's why I gave this information out as best I could in hopes to help you. And I want you all to know that you helped me a lot too by giving me ideas, watching these videos, subscribing, sharing, all that stuff. I mean, you're helping me just as much as I'm helping you. So 100% mutual beneficial appreciation. If you need anything else from me, you can go to magicprepper.com. There's a Discord there where it's free. You don't have to go behind a paywall to get to it. And there's different state channels and all types of stuff there, so you can network with other like-minded people. And of course, there's other like discounts and all kinds of things. But in reality, it's just us. It really is just us. And I'm glad you're on my team.